The 10 largest pharmaceutical companies form the so-called Big Pharma, which controls the world pharmaceutical market. In 2004, global spending on prescription drugs amounted to $500 billion. In 2002, Big Pharma's overall profit amounted to $35.9 billion. The profit made by Big Pharma exceeds the combined total profits of the other 490 multinationals on the Fortune 500 list. In 2004, Big Pharma registered a total pre-tax profit of $205 billion, nearly as much as the gross national product of Denmark. Here is a list of the 10 most widely sold medicines in the world, according to the most up-to-date data available from 2004. The most widely sold medicine is the cholesterol-reducing Lipitor, produced by Pfizer. It made $10.3 billion over the course of just 1 year. Next comes another cholesterol-reducing drug, Zocor, produced by Merck. It made $6.1 billion in 1 year. The third most widely sold medicine is Zyprexa, an antidepressant produced by Eli Lilly. It made $4.8 billion in a year. Among the remaining 7 most widely sold medicines in the world, there are 2 which treat ulcers, 1 for high blood pressure, 1 antidepressant, 1 for heart problems, 1 for asthma and 1 for anemia, with a total annual turnover of around $48 billion. All of these drugs were sold in rich countries such as the United States, the European Union and Japan. Geneva is the financial heart of Europe. It is here that we must start our investigation in order to understand the political and economic problems of access to pharmaceutical drugs. All the international organizations which deal with pharmaceuticals have their base in Geneva. The World Health Organization, WHO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, Médecins Sans Frontières, and, naturally, the World Trade Organization, WTO.
And the WTO today, which covers many different areas of international trade. Trade in goods, trade in services. It covers a wide range of issues from tariffs and duties on goods to subsidies to non-tariff rules.
The WTO has 150 member states, almost the entire planet. The world trade system is governed by WTO agreements.
We started to look into the new rules on pharmaceutical patenting that came out of the World Trade Organization, which are called the trade-related aspects of intellectual property right, the TRIPS agreement. Because we saw that medicines that were under patent were so much more expensive than medicines that were not patented.
The International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, IFPMA, has its base in Geneva.
We have 26 member companies, and we have 55 national associations, which are in 55 countries around the world. And the issues that we work on are basically regulatory issues, because the pharmaceutical industry is the most regulated manufacturing industry that there is. Everything is regulated, from the clinical trials to the patents to the pricing in many countries. And so we work on these regulatory issues.
Ma come? In tutta la mattina non ha finito una lettera.
Mi scusi, ma ho tanto mal di testa che non riesco a lavorare.
E lei per un mal di testa rischia il posto. Prenda un calmante Murri e in pochi minuti le passerà.
Non soffrite inutilmente. Quando avete mal di testa, mal di denti, nevralgie o reumatismi, usate calmante Murri. Il calmante Murri calma rapidamente ogni dolore nevralgico e reumatico. Ricordate, quando avete mal di testa o nevralgie, prendete calmante Murri. Il dolore vi passerà in pochi minuti.
Here are the 5 infectious diseases that kill the most people every year, according to 2004 data. Various forms of pulmonary disease, 4 million deaths. AIDS, 2.8 million deaths. Diarrhea, 1.8 million deaths. Tuberculosis, 1.6 million deaths. Malaria, 1.6 million deaths. The list goes on, accounting for 15 million deaths a year. 85% of the affected live in the southern hemisphere, yet they account for only 11% of world spending on health. In rich countries, 15% of the world's sick spend the remaining 89%.
One, the medicines that are desperately needed, diagnostic tools that are desperately needed to diagnose people properly or diagnose children properly are not available. They are not being developed. Second, medicines that we knew were available, for example, AIDS medicines, were not available in developing countries because they were priced out of reach of the ability of people in developing countries to pay. And third, there were medicines that existed that actually were developed for use to treat tropical diseases, but that were no longer produced. Even though the needs were there, the people who needed the medicines existed, but as consumers, they did not exist. As a market, they do not exist because they don't have enough money to pay for the treatment.
What's the difference between a generic medicine and a brand name one? Actually, they contain the same active ingredients, and they're made in the same way. They are identical. The brand name ones are patented, and so they generally cost a lot more. But who regulates the patenting system? Remember one word: TRIPS.
TRIPS agreement.
What it means is trade-related intellectual property. Property is an agreement covering intellectual property systems and their impact on international trade. It really was the first major effort in the GATT-WTO system to create a relationship between trade and intellectual property protection.
A patent is a legal title granted by the state, giving its holder a temporary monopoly on the use of an invention for a limited area and time. The patent can cover a product or the process used in making something. From the start, the existence of patents was justified by the fact that exclusive rights to commercial exploitation stimulates new inventions which, when the patent expires, will pass into the public domain. In recent years, even genetically modified organisms have been patented, including plants, animals, and microorganisms, and the list could go on.
There is an important link between the TRIPS agreement and access to drugs.
Because it treated medicines as any other sector.
The TRIPS agreement obliged all countries that are members to the World Trade Organization, now around 150 countries, to adopt patent protection for pharmaceuticals.
Before the TRIPS agreement, countries either don't grant patents on medicines or they grant for a shorter period, 5 years, 10 years. But now you have to give for 20 years.
The patent owner can charge high prices. He may act as a monopolist.
So in this 20-year period, no other generic medicine can enter into the market.
The patent owner can charge the price that the market may bear. And this means that many people will not be able to purchase and use these patented drugs.
This is the problem with the TRIPS agreement, that it kind of gives the patent holder monopoly of the market, and generic medicines cannot enter into the market. And because there's no competition, the patent holder is able to keep prices as high as it wants.
TRIPS represents the triumph of the particular interests of the great European and American multinationals over the general interests of billions of people in developing countries. Trade ministers were not aware that in signing these agreements, they were at the same time condemning billions of the world's poorest citizens to death. TRIPS has imposed a regime of intellectual property currently dominant in the United States and in Europe on the entire world. Also, the idea that intellectual property rights act as a stimulus for innovation because they guarantee higher profits to be reinvested in research and development cannot be said to be true.
Many of these products are developed in rich countries because these are the countries which have the investment, which have the scientists, which have the technological strength to produce these things. But I think it's important to point out that one of the reasons an open international trading system is important is that it does enable people in poorer countries to benefit from these products.
97% of patents worldwide are held by people or businesses in industrialized countries, and more than half of the royalties are paid to the USA. Even in developing countries, 80% of patents are granted to those who are resident in industrialized countries. Even the United States sometimes finds it hard to enforce TRIPS. Like in October 2001, while still reeling from the Twin Towers attack, there was widespread panic about anthrax and a new bioterrorism attack. There was an explosion in the number of reports of anthrax contagion, culminating on October the 5th with the death of Robert Stevens, a photographer working for the American Media Press Agency. There was even a rumor that President Bush himself had been infected, and the only antibiotic known to be effective against anthrax, Cipro, produced by Bayer and at the same time still under patent until the end of 2003, became virtually unobtainable. The US government decided to ask Bayer to provide an enormous supply of the drug at less than the $5 a pill that was the retail price. Given the German company's reluctance, the US government announced its approval of 2 generic pharmaceuticals, doxycycline and penicillin, as a treatment against anthrax, and that these pharmaceuticals should be available as generics, because they could be produced by a number of pharmaceutical companies and so be relatively cheap and easy to obtain. The front page of the New York Times read, "American law is very clear. When the United States government needs a patented product, any official authorized to make purchases can ignore the patent and license someone else to make it." The next day, Bayer responded, saying that it was not at all impressed by the US government's actions. Actions violating the infamous TRIPS. But the threat of non-compliance with TRIPS extended into Canada, with more and more offers arriving from pharmaceutical companies producing generics. And so, on October the 25th, the US government gained the upper hand. Under the threat of the generics, Bayer agreed to produce all the pills the US needed, at the cost of only 95 cents each. In the end, however, there were only 3 deaths from anthrax poisoning and a few dozen cases of contagion.
La OMS publicó en el año 98 un documento donde identificaba cuáles eran los mecanismos que existían en ese acuerdo TRIPS que se podrían interpretar de una manera positiva para proteger la salud pública. Y lo publicamos y hubo una polémica terrible, hubo pedidos de que se retirara el documento, hubo insultos a la OMS, que el documento era mediocre, que era mentira, que era falso, y empezó la polémica y el debate sobre si en realidad había una flexibilidad o no había una flexibilidad. Esto llevó 3 años hasta Doha, donde se hizo la declaración donde se dice realmente existe este derecho, existe la flexibilidad, existen mecanismos que se pueden utilizar para proteger la salud pública en caso de un efecto negativo de la implementación de estos acuerdos de propiedad intelectual. Los países pueden hacer una licencia obligatoria, pueden hacer una importación paralela y eso es una cosa perfectamente conforme al acuerdo TRIPS.
Parallel imports. Thanks to Article 6 of the TRIPS agreement, in the interests of public health and for limited periods only, it is possible to import a pharmaceutical drug from the company which offers the best economic conditions, without asking the patent holder's permission.
Hay países como el Brasil que no ha hecho una licencia obligatoria, pero que ha utilizado la licencia obligatoria como un instrumento para negociar. Y en el momento que han anunciado varias veces que van a hacer una licencia obligatoria, entonces la industria ha dicho, bueno, no, un momento, vamos a negociar, y ha tenido el efecto que es lo que se necesita, el efecto que es una reducción de precios para poder aumentar el acceso a los medicamentos.
Compulsory licenses. Thanks to Article 30 of the TRIPS agreement, it is possible for a country experiencing a healthcare emergency, one country, to produce a generic pharmaceutical without paying the patent rights. This license has a limited duration.
They have passed a compulsory license bill that a country can ask for a compulsory license, but they have made the rules and regulations so difficult that it is not practical. What they should therefore do, that the third world should have a very simple, practical, compulsory licensing system.
Developing countries, when they wanted to make use of the flexibilities, there was a lot of pressure on them from the pharmaceutical companies as well as some of the industrialized countries not to make use of this flexibility. This was the case of, say, South Africa, when they wanted to change their laws to incorporate the flexibilities. 39 pharmaceutical companies took South African government to court about it.
Hundreds of protesters affiliated to the AIDS lobby group, the Treatment Action Campaign, and Labour Federation COSATU are marching through the streets of Pretoria. The Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association is suing the South African government for a law that enables the country to purchase generic drugs rather than their more expensive equivalents.
We are ready, if necessary, to take all the measures necessary to get treatment to people with HIV and AIDS.
This case is really about what comes first, commercial interests of the multinationals or the right to life of people.
Good afternoon, welcome to 1 o'clock live. I'm Sally Burdett. News from around the country, around the world at lunchtime. In the headlines, drug companies drop their lawsuit against the government.
This is a win-win situation for the government and the Treatment Action Campaign. Not only has the case been withdrawn, but the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association has agreed to pay legal costs.
Labeling it a major victory, representatives of pharmaceutical companies appeared withdrawn.
We're going to need many more countries making use of the Doha Declaration, and particularly producing countries. Because if the larger producing countries, such as India, do not allow their companies to produce generic versions of newer medicines, there is, at the end of the day, there aren't going to be any sources left to import from.
In 2005, India had to bring its patent laws into line with TRIPS. Patents on pharmaceutical products were reintroduced. The only possible loophole is Article 3D of the new law, which states that a patent cannot be granted for any drug which does not represent a substantial pharmaceutical innovation. That's why Novartis' anti-cancer drug Glivec did not qualify for a patent, and why Novartis has taken the Indian government and its law to court.
They say that they want a declaration that 3D is unconstitutional. That is the prayer. They have added also another prayer which is not here, that 3D is in violation of TRIPS. So you want to copy that? It's our argument that under the TRIPS agreement, a private individual cannot argue in a domestic court that any law of any country is not TRIPS compliant. That is only for the government to do, and that too in the WTO dispute panel. So according to us, they cannot make a declaration. That is what we have argued, and the court will decide. They need not have challenged 3D at all, but since they have challenged 3D, if they succeed, it will impact all the drugs, whether they are cancer drugs or anti-cancer drugs or antiretrovirals or TB, malaria. If we succeed ourselves, then it also impacts favorably on all the drugs. So 3D challenge impacts on all drugs.
India is the main producer and exporter of high-quality generic drugs. Companies such as Ranbaxy and Cipla sell their medicines to many nations in the southern hemisphere and to organizations including Médecins Sans Frontières, who buy 80% of their medicines from India. These are companies with very high quality standards. Cipla was founded in the 1930s to allow India to break away from its dependence on the British pharmaceuticals industry. Gandhi himself was enthusiastic about its foundation.
No. I like intellectual property. I certainly believe that if somebody invents a new drug or something, he should be suitably rewarded. There is no question about that. I've never been against patents. Please, I have been against monopoly. That in the third world, in a country like India, with 1.1 billion people today, likely to go to 1.5 billion by 2020, we cannot afford a monopoly.
The golden age of the Indian pharmaceuticals industry began in 1972, when Indira Gandhi abolished patents on pharmaceutical products as a means of addressing internal health crises. This considerably boosted the production of generics.
Till 1984, the Italian local pharmaceutical industry, the indigenous Italian industry, was on top of the world. You had Carlo Erba, you had Pharma Italia, you had all the large, Le Petit, all the large Italian companies. They were manufacturing in Italy and exporting. Then in 1984, like what India did in 1995, they reintroduced what is called product patents. And the minute they reintroduced, the Italian pharma industry went down. The same is likely to happen to India. If you look at the disease pattern in India, 110 million mental patients, 80 million heart patients, 60 million diabetics, 60 million asthmatics. 1 in 3 Indians has got latent TB, 50 million hepatitis B cases. By 2015, we will have 35 million HIV positive. So these figures cannot, India simply cannot afford a monopoly. what the government has essentially done has neglected the poor man on the street in India, and they have virtually committed selective genocide, that by 2015, hardly any Indians will be able to afford life-saving and essential drugs.
मेरा नाम भारती विलास देसाई है। मैं MSF में पीयर एजुकेटर करके काम करती हूँ और मुझे 2002 में मालूम हुआ कि मैं HIV संक्रमित हूँ और मेरे हस्बैंड 2003 में गुजर गए। उन्हें भी यही बीमारी थी और मेरे तीनों बच्चों को भी यही बीमारी है। और मेरे भाई, सिर्फ मेरा भाई जो था उसने साथ दिया और बस उन्होंने कभी पैसों की मदद नहीं की, कभी और किसी बात की मदद नहीं की। और जब मेरे हस्बैंड गुजर गए और गुजर जाने के बाद 14 दिन होता है, जब हम लोग हिंदू संस्कृति में वो खाना खिलाया जाता है 13 दिन के बाद, तो वो खाना खिलाने के बाद उन्होंने मेरे बैग भी भर दिए और मेरे बच्चों को और मेरे को कहा कि आप जो कांदिवली का रूम है वहाँ चले जाइए और वहाँ रहिए। मैंने पूछा ऐसा क्यों? मेरे हस्बैंड थे तब तक आपने मुझे अपने साथ रहने दिया, निकाल रहे हो। तो मुझे ऐसा बोला क्या कि आपके बच्चों को भी है, आपको भी है, तो फिर आप अगर चाकू से कुछ काटोगे तो हमको भी इन्फेक्शन हो जाएगा, तो इसलिए आप हमारे साथ नहीं रह सकते। और उन्होंने मुझे कांदिवली में एक छोटा सा झोपड़ा लेके दिया।
The impact of HIV/AIDS in Africa is devastating. Not only does it cause millions of deaths, but it has dealt a harsh blow to the already fragile economies and has caused changes in patterns of behaviour and lifestyle.
Eu pensava que era fim do mundo para mim. Até eu pensava de matar a minha filha, que já tem 14 anos. Porque eu pensava que era fim do mundo para mim. O mundo ainda estava a me discriminar. Eu quebrei o silêncio, foi na água de Maputo, foi no ano 2002. Porque muita gente dizia que não existe pessoas que têm SIDA. Então eu quis mostrar às pessoas que existe HIV e SIDA. Eu levantei, eu falei da minha vida. Eu disse, estou aqui, eu vivo com HIV e SIDA. Eu descobri que eu sou HIV positiva através de bebê. Eu tive bebê com 3,6 kg. E bebê começou a ficar doente. Foi ficar de baixa no Hospital Central de Maputo. E eu fugi uma noite. Fui para casa com o bebê, porque estavam a me discriminar. O bebê começou a piorar. Depois de 2 meses, o bebê morreu.
Que muitas destas mulheres, quando vêm para o hospital, não vêm para fazer o teste. Elas vêm somente para fazer o seguimento de gravidez. Quando são positivas, qual é a tendência? É proteger somente o filho. Elas seguem até ao parto. Então, há algumas que tendem a deixar o seguimento do tratamento. O nosso maior objetivo é fazer com que esta mulher reduza realmente a possibilidade de transmitir o vírus ao filho, ao mesmo tempo que, depois do parto, continue fazendo este segmento necessário até a testagem da criança.
AIDS is a neglected disease. Even though there is a lot of research going on in AIDS, all the research and development efforts are geared towards finding the next generation of medicine to treat the people in Europe and in North America that need a new generation of antiretroviral treatment to deal with their resistance. But the kind of research we need today on AIDS is tools easier to use on a large scale in resource-poor settings. We need medicines to treat children with AIDS. Children with AIDS almost do not exist in Europe and North America, so the development of these products do not take place.
The profit made in the pharmacological sector in the 1990s was equivalent to 25% of the total turnover, well over that made by any other consumer goods sector. These are colossal profit margins. To give you an idea, the average profit in other sectors in the same period was 3.3% of turnover. So you would expect there to be a huge investment in research and development. Yet, Big Pharma only invested about 11 to 14% in research and development, while their expenditure in marketing and admin amounted to 36% of turnover.
It is true that there are prices which are high, so to speak, at the beginning compared to the end price of the drug. But marketing also is part of this because the company has 8 to 10 years of the exclusive right under the patent, and that company is competing with other patented drugs. The research company has to recoup, to catch back the costs of research and development over an 8-year period, or frequently it can be less.
In the 1970s, roughly 70 new chemical compounds were recorded each year. Since then, there's been a constant reduction in genuine pharmacological innovations, arriving at the mere 23 substances approved in 2004, of which only 4 can be considered significant therapeutic advances.
The expense comes essentially in what is called evergreening. That means how, if I have a good product, how do I extend the patent life? Now tell me something, if you have a drug, say an antidepressant drug, how many patents should a drug really have? 2, 3, 4, 5? Now there are drugs today controlled by the multinationals where there are 240 patents on the same drug. Different crystalline forms of the drug, different salts, different esters, then metabolites, prodrugs, new drug delivery systems. So the whole thing is camouflaged so that they can extend patent life.
En los 25 últimos años del siglo XX, de los cerca de 1.400, 1.500 fármacos registrados en todo el mundo para enfermedades en general, solo 13 eran para enfermedades tropicales y de estos 13 solo 4 eran fármacos antimaláricos.
Many of the old drugs were developed for different reasons, for example, for military reasons, or even as a final stage of colonialism when European powers were interested in malaria because they had many of their own citizens in malarious areas. As soon as those motivations go, then there is no motivation to develop, no commercial motivation to develop malaria drugs.
La guerra aveva portato alla diffusione dei moderni insetticidi, primo fra tutti il DDT. Con essi in Italia, da uno scienziato nostro, pioniere e apostolo della lotta antimalarica, venne la parola nuova: distruggere non più le larve dell'anofele, ma l'insetto adulto, rendergli la vita impossibile là dove succhia i germi o li trasporta e li inocula, le case. L'attuazione fu pronta e grandiosa. Siamo nel deposito di insetticidi di una stazione antimalarica provinciale. Una squadra si prepara. Si irrora razionalmente da una data altezza sulle pareti, sotto la quale è dimostrato che le zanzare non si posano mai, fino al soffitto. La squadra si è distribuita nella casa, un uomo per ambiente.
Nelle stalle, le pareti e gli stessi animali vengono trattati con questo insetticida. I vantaggi sono considerevoli. Con esso si disinfestano le sementi. Si incrementa la fioricoltura. Nell'uso domestico è prezioso. Gli apparecchi giunti quest'anno in Sardegna fanno piovere dal cielo nuvole di DDT sopra le superfici di acque stagnanti. La prima ondata ormai è passata e il grosso delle anoferi è stato sterminato.
A conclusione, la mortalità per la malaria può segnare una cifra che sarebbe apparsa assurda pochi anni fa. 0.
If malaria was a disease in Europe or the US, we would cure it very easily. The real problem is that most people who have malaria are very poor. They cannot afford good drugs, so they have relied mainly on old drugs which have resistance to them. You have to prevent people from getting malaria. That includes things like bed nets, it includes things like controlling the mosquitoes. But even so, there are hundreds of millions of people who develop malaria, and those people need medicines.
In March 2007, the non-profit organisation Drugs for Neglected Diseases, an MSF initiative, and Sanofi Aventis developed an anti-malaria drug that will only cost $1 a pill and, most importantly, will be patent-free. Anyone will be able to produce it and improve it. Its name is AZAC. Who knows if this new drug will really help those most in need?
You can have a free drug that's given away. For example, the WHO knows that the medicines that were donated this year by one of our member companies for sleeping sickness is not getting to many patients in Africa, not because of the price, because the drugs were given away. They're not getting to patients because there's no structure to deliver these medicines.
Un antibiótico para una enfermedad respiratoria no se usa lo mismo en África que en un hospital en Londres o en Roma o en París, porque si es en polvo es muy probable que la madre vaya a mezclar con un poco de agua que no es potable. Pero bueno, el niño va a sobrevivir, no en las mismas condiciones de higiene y en las condiciones óptimas, pero que me digan a mí que los africanos no tendrían capacidad para organizarse y evitar las muertes que está habiendo hoy en día porque es algo demasiado sofisticado, yo no lo creo, siento mucho.
Aqui desenhei o Sol, não é? Conheces o Sol. Então está aqui o Sol, é para tomar durante o dia, ok? Então aqui desenhei a Lua, que diz que os comprimidos vai tomar à noite. Portanto, estes comprimidos é para tomar durante a noite. Um comprimido em cada noite. Estes é para tomar nas manhãs, ok? Então, vamos ver onde está o Sol. Colocamos na fila do Sol. Então, vamos aprender a fechar com cuidado, porque saltam. Fechar? Vamos ver se vai conseguir fechar com cuidado, senão tem que segurar, senão espalha-se. É porque está mal posicionado. Tem que arranjar uma boa posição para ele fechar. Está bem? Okay.
What we are proposing is that governments need to clearly spell what their priorities are. For example, if they came to Kenya and someone wanted to do business in Kenya, we will clearly indicate to them that the priority diseases in this country are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if someone wanted to do business, they would need to show that they are covering the areas of priority as they do business in the other areas of health.
South Africa has the highest number of HIV-positive people in the world, over 6.5 million people. A portion of the anti-HIV medication arrives thanks to a sizable contribution from the states and international organizations, as well as the large humanitarian foundations.
It's like the Gates Foundation today in AIDS. They will not treat, but they say we will spend our money to develop an AIDS vaccine. So who develops the AIDS vaccine for Gates? Merck in America. Indians are being used as guinea pigs for the trials. Fine, good, I'm not saying no. But I asked the Gates Foundation a question, that suppose a vaccine is developed, and God willing, there will be a vaccine. With your money, it has been developed. Will India get the know-how to produce that vaccine free? They said, no, there's the property of Merck. So then if Merck charges $400 per vaccine shot, who's going to pay for it? I can't copy it anymore under the new laws. So I'm a great believer that public-funded research should be free for the public. You should not be allowed to patent.
In 2004, the Parliamentary Inquiry Commission set up in the UK to control the local pharmaceutical industry declared, "The Health Minister has taken it for granted for too long and has been too optimistic that the interests of public health and those of the pharmaceuticals industry should coincide. The result is that the industry has been given the green light for far too long." The influence of the industry can be seen at all levels of health assistance, from the initial discovery and development of drugs with clinical trials, to their promotion with doctor and patient groups, up to their prescription and the setting down of clinical guidelines. There has been a definite tendency to classify more and more individuals as abnormal or in need of pharmacological treatment. So the pharmaceutical houses, with the consensus of governments, are altering our concept of illness. A case in point is that of high blood pressure, or hypertension. Until 2003, the starting point of hypertension was deemed to be when blood pressure had a maximum of over 140 and a minimum of over 90. After 2003, an expert panel decided on the existence of pre-hypertension, which ranges from 120/80 to 140/90. And so many people found that they had a medical problem overnight.
È un licantropo. Che cos'è? Un licantropo. Ah, e cos'è?
Or an even more serious case is that of the so-called attention deficit disorder, or hyperactivity, particularly common amongst children. And so during the 1990s, since it was decided that this was indeed a disorder and not a normal condition, the number of children labelled as being affected by ADD has increased sevenfold, to the extent that today, 15% of school-aged children in the United States take amphetamines regularly. And the same thing is happening in other countries. So if during the next few months your children start getting too exuberant, take heart in knowing you can soon calm them down with a healthy dose of Ritalin.
Over the last few decades, we've seen a kind of privatization of healthcare and a privatization of research, privatization of health research and a privatization of the development of new products, which of course has led to a system that will serve the market, but if the market doesn't exist, you're not served. So that, I feel, is a huge barrier. It's a little difficult to ask pharmaceutical companies that have been established to make money and satisfy their shareholders to do things that will ultimately not bring a lot of money. You need the governments involved. You need governments to regulate things. You need different funding sources, and you need the health sector involved in setting the priorities.
Pharmaceutical companies tend to produce a massive marketing operation, dressed up as science, financing research, sponsoring conferences, studies, publications, supporting associations, in such a way that many medics feel that they shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them. In the West, spending on medicines is increasing by about 7% a year, while the GNP is only increasing by 2%. How much longer will the health systems of wealthy countries be able to withstand the increasing cost of medicines and guarantee their citizens free access to them? How much longer will the problem of access to medicine be confined to poor nations?